They thought they could silence me. The homeowners association marched onto my property with letters, fines, and smug warnings, claiming my family's well water was non-compliant with their shiny neighborhood rules. They banned me from using it, demanded I hook into city water at outrageous costs, and threatened liens if I refused. They believed they had me cornered, but what they never understood was that their wealth, their comfort, and even their pride rested on a fragile secret, because the lifeblood of their perfectly manicured golf course flowed from beneath my land, and I was ready to make them pay. I was born on this land. My grandfather dug the first well with his bare hands almost 70 years ago, and for 3 generations we relied on that water for everything, our crops, our livestock, even our daily lives. That well was more than just a hole in the ground. It was a legacy, a symbol of our independence and survival. When I inherited the property, I promised myself I would protect it at all costs. 15 years ago, the world around me started to change. Developers bought the farmland across the road, bulldozed fields that once grew corn, and built a sprawling gated community. Shiny houses with stone facades lined the new streets, and luxury cars gleamed in driveways. At the center of their pride stood a massive golf course, stretching green and perfect under the summer sun. With that came their precious homeowners association, complete with board members who thought of themselves as kings. At first, I did not mind. They had their world, and I had mine. I raised my animals, worked my crops, and pulled clean, cool water from my family's well. But soon the whispers started. Some neighbors complained about the sight of my tractors. Others said my barn was too weathered, too rustic for their manicured paradise. I ignored them, thinking they would tire their nitpicking. I was wrong. The HOA gained power quickly. They set strict rules for their community and then tried to stretch those rules beyond their boundaries. They wanted silence, perfection, and obedience. And when they realized they could not control me directly, they searched for any weakness they could exploit. It did not take long before their greedy eyes landed on my well, the one thing that kept me independent from their grip. The first letter arrived folded neatly in my mailbox, with the HOA logo printed in gold at the top. They claimed my well water posed a risk to property values and did not meet their aesthetic standards. I laughed when I read it. How could water be an eyesore? I tore it up and threw it away. But the letters kept coming. First once a month, then once a week. They demanded I cease using my well immediately and connect to the city water system. The cost to do so would run into tens of thousands of dollars. Money they knew I did not have lying around. When I ignored them, they escalated. They hired inspectors who showed up unannounced on my driveway, measuring, taking pictures, acting like they had authority over me. One afternoon, I came home to find a bright orange notice nailed to my fence post. Well, use prohibited under HOA guidelines. Immediate compliance required. That was the moment I realized this was not going to stop on its own. They were not just trying to regulate their little neighborhood. They were trying to crush me. The HOA president, a man named Richard, finally came to my door. He wore a golf shirt with the association logo and spoke with the tone of a banker about to foreclose on a house. He told me flatly, "Either you hook into city water like everyone else, or we will take legal action. And believe me, we have deeper pockets than you." I clenched my fists, but I said nothing. They thought they could push me around, but I knew my rights. At least I thought I did. The next week, fines started arriving in the mail. $100, then $500, then over $1,000. They threatened to place a lien on my property. And when I tried calling the county to complain, they shrugged and told me it was a civil dispute. The HOA knew the process would take months, maybe years, while in the meantime I bled money. They believed they had the upper hand. What they did not realize was that they had just picked a fight on the one battlefield where I knew every inch of the ground. The weeks that followed were brutal. Every envelope in the mailbox carried another fine or another threat. Bills stacked up on my kitchen table like a tower of debt. The HOA had cut a deal with the city to raise my water rates even higher, and every drop I pulled from the tap felt like a reminder that they were tightening the noose. Neighbors avoided me. Some whispered that I should just give up and comply, that fighting the HOA was impossible. Others stared at my property with disdain, as though my stubbornness was the cause of their rising fees. The HOA board grew bolder. They filed noise complaints about my tractor, claimed my barn was an eyesore, and even accused me of violating community standards by keeping livestock. It was harassment, pure and simple. I will not lie. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table, head in my hands, wondering if they had finally beaten me. I thought about selling, thought about walking away from the land that had been in my family for 3 generations. But every time I looked at the well, that old stone ring my grandfather built, I felt something stronger than despair. I felt anger, and that anger kept me alive. One evening, I dug through the old wooden chest in my attic, searching for the original deed to property. I wanted to see if there was any clause, any forgotten detail I could use to fight back. My grandfather had been meticulous with records, and sure enough, I found a yellowed folder stuffed with maps, agreements, and county seals. That night, I stayed up until dawn reading, and that was when I found it. The golf course, the pride of the HOA, the very reason people bought million-dollar homes in this gated community, drew its irrigation from the aquifer beneath my land. My grandfather had negotiated those water rights decades ago, granting limited use to the county for agricultural purposes, but never for recreation. In fact, the papers made it clear. Any diversion of water for non-agricultural use could be revoked at any time by the landowner. I sat there stunned. For years, they had been pumping water from my family's source, feeding their precious fairways and manicured greens. And all this time, they thought they had me trapped. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together. Without that water, their golf course would wither in days. Without the golf course, their entire neighborhood would crumble. Property values would drop, residents would riot, and the board would lose everything. I smiled for the first time in months. I had just found the lever that could topple their entire empire. I did not act immediately. Revenge, like crops, needed time to ripen. First, I met with a lawyer who confirmed what I suspected. The water rights were airtight, signed, and notarized decades ago. The HOA had no claim. Then I began to quietly prepare. I studied irrigation maps, traced the underground flow, and identified the key points where their system tapped into my aquifer. I purchased new equipment for my farm, equipment that just happened to divert more water onto my fields. Little by little, I adjusted the flow, reducing the trickle that reached their sprinklers. At first, no one noticed. Their fountains still bubbled, their greens still sparkled under the sun. But I was waiting for summer, waiting for the scorching heat, when every drop mattered most. That was when I would strike. July arrived, and with it came the hottest week in years. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees, and the golf course staff scrambled to keep the grass alive. That was when I shut the valve. Within days, the sprinklers sputtered. The once bright fairways turned a sickly yellow. The putting greens, once smooth as velvet, cracked under the heat. Golfers complained loudly, members demanded refunds, and tournaments were canceled. The HOA board panicked. They called emergency contractors, drilled test wells, and even trucked in water at enormous expense. Nothing worked. Every morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the slow death of their pride. The same people who had mocked me now paced nervously, pointing fingers at one another. Their empire was crumbling, and I had not even left my land. On the 5th day, the HOA board showed up at my door. Richard, red-faced and sweating through his polo shirt, demanded I restore the water immediately. The others stood behind him, their smugness gone, replaced with desperation. I calmly invited them inside and placed the deed on the table. Line by line, I showed them the clauses, the signatures, the legal proof that the water was mine and always had been. Their voices faltered, their confidence melted. Finally, I leaned back and made my terms clear. Reinstate my well, erase every fine, pay for damages, and guarantee in writing that they would never touch my property again. If they refused, their golf course would remain a desert. It took them less than a week to cave. The HOA board signed every agreement my lawyer drafted. They restored my well rights, erased a mountain of fines, and even paid for upgrades to my farm as compensation. The smug president who once threatened me now avoided my gaze, humiliated in front of his own neighbors. The golf course eventually recovered, but not before the damage had been done. Residents flooded social media with complaints, blaming the board for their incompetence. Property values dipped, membership numbers dropped, and the HOA's reputation never recovered. As for me, I walked my land with pride, knowing that for once, the little guy had won. Every time I heard the distant whir of sprinklers on that golf course, I smiled because they knew the truth. Their survival depended entirely on a man they tried to destroy. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission. They thought their rules, their money, and their arrogance would break me. Instead, they learned that the land holds its own power, and when you push a farmer too far, he will push back harder than you can imagine. So the next time someone tells you the HOA always wins, remember this story. Because sometimes the quiet neighbor with an old well holds the key to their downfall. If you enjoyed the story of justice served, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because there are plenty more battles to tell.